chair on this leg here. No, the other side, on your left side. Just lift your chair.
Oh, it's somebody else's.
We're gonna drag it all over. That's you leave it down there. I just didn't want it to pull back.
Good.
Oh yeah, we got the whole village behind us here.
That's
You
beautiful.
barely got me. Charlie called this morning and I was on
It actually looks great on television. Yeah, is this live?
Memorex.
Yes, this is live. Call in.
Live, really? Andrea?
You might get a mysterious call from San Francisco.
But I mean, is it going to be aired later on?
A date.
Yeah, it'll be aired. It'll be aired.
Hey, baby,
It'll
what
be
you
aired.
doing?
Yeah, people will try
It's being aired right now.
aired, and it'll be shown again, of
Oh,
course.
good, okay.
Oh, okay.
We hopefully will.
Thank you for joining us here at Voices from the Village. Today we're going to be talking about a topic which has far-reaching implications, far more reaching than marijuana and medical marijuana. It is the issue of the federal government intervening into the affairs of states. For many years, the phrase states' rights stood for things that were not all desirable, but perhaps there has come a time when the issue of states' rights has been cast in a different light. Today we're very pleased to have with us in the studio several people who've been involved with the fact that marijuana has been made legal in the state of California by the vote of the people through Proposition 215. This proposition makes it legal for physicians to prescribe marijuana for a medical condition. Recently, the federal government has brought a lawsuit attempting to close down the clubs that distribute the marijuana. This raises many issues of law, and we'll be discussing them today. We're very pleased to have in the studio with us today Silver Knight.
Yes.
How are you today?
How are you doing, Joe?
You're affiliated, I'm doing okay.
With the Women's Alliance for Medical Marijuana, WHAM. I'm a patient and WHAM's nurse and political activist.
We look forward to talking about that.
Thank
Kate
you.
Wells,
Yes.
attorney representing the Cannabis Club in a group action with a number of other cannabis clubs, the Cannabis Club of Santa Cruz.
That's correct,
And
yes.
we'll be talking to you about many of the legal ramifications of this action brought by the federal government.
Thank you for having me.
Our pleasure. Andrea Tischler, you've been involved with an organization called Adios Camp.
That's correct.
We'll be talking a little bit about that.
Fine.
And Valerie Corral,
Hello.
a leader, one of the first people to come out very openly and say medical marijuana is a necessity. Thank you, Valerie, for making time to come here. And my co-host, without whom I would not be here today, Charlie Phillips. Glad to have you here today. Why don't we start off very directly with the issue of what is happening legally, and let's ask Kate Wells, who is representing the Cannabis Club of Santa Cruz in a group action with other cannabis clubs, what exactly is the federal government trying to do, and do you believe they have a legal basis for doing it?
What the federal government is trying to do is close down the cannabis clubs. This is a short-term goal of theirs. However, the first question from the federal judge to the representative from the DEA who was arguing the case, actually one of the black suits came all the way from Washington, D.C. to argue this. They couldn't get the U.S. attorney of the state of California, so go figure, I don't know why. At any rate, the first question out of the mouth of the judge was, do you intend by this to declare that anyone in the state of California, any patient, anyone basically, who uses medicinal marijuana is breaking federal law? So with the intent, obviously, to put the clubs out of it, to just get straight to the issue of medical marijuana. And Mr. Quinlivan, the government attorney, had to respond yes. Which means
Their intent is to put them out of business.
their
And
intent
and to
is to
stop
reach everyone who uses medicinal marijuana.
every patient.
Every patient. whether or not they're a member of a club, every patient. Now, they're going about this in a very unique way. In fact, it is the first time this has ever been done. This is a case of first impression. They have come after us in a civil injunction. Now, so what they're doing is basically depriving these clubs of the right to a jury trial. And with good reason. We're quite sure that any jury that we might get in San Francisco, which is where the action was filed, they wouldn't be able to get a conviction. We would have all kinds of defenses available to us. So instead of that, they're doing an end run around the Constitution as far as we see it, and they're bringing this civil injunction, which is a determination that will be made by a judge and not by a jury. So they're basing this on the Controlled Substance Act, that marijuana is a Schedule I drug under the Controlled Substance Act, and therefore it's against federal law. Therefore, the state law conflicts with federal law, and they can, in fact, exert their supreme power and tell the people of the state of California that you didn't know what you were doing, and we know so much better than you, so you all have to stop what you're doing. The first issue is that the Controlled Substance Act, the way that the drugs are generally a police power of the state, not a power of the federal government. And
different states have different laws about different drugs.
Absolutely.
Some states you can be prescribed a heroin derivative for pain. In other states you cannot.
Absolutely.
And this is recognized by the federal government. That they recognize the right of states to make that decision.
To make their own decisions under the police power of the state. Now, they use this, the Commerce Clause to state that because
the Commerce Clause of
the Constitution, they're using the Commerce Clause to say that our activity actually affects interstate commerce, that even though we're entirely intrastate activity, we affect interstate commerce, and therefore they have the right to intervene and come into the state and tell the state what to do. Which, you know, in our instance, of course, our first argument is we are entirely intrastate. Prop 215 is only for California residents. It's the marijuana. Marijuana
must be a resident of California to benefit from Proposition 215.
Absolutely.
You cannot come from another state and receive marijuana.
Not unless you want to set up residence in California first. You have to be a California resident. So our first argument is we are entirely intrastate, and therefore we don't care what your Controlled Substance Act says. We are not having an impact on interstate commerce, and leave us alone.
So are you saying the entire federal action is brought based on the Commerce Clause of the Constitution?
Yes. Yes.
And it has nothing to do with drugs are bad for Californians?
Well, that's the intent of the Controlled Substance Act.
Yes, but they're not presenting it like you are creating drug addicts. They are attacking it from the point of view of you are engaging in interstate commerce that's banned by the Constitution?
Well, there's one step removed.
Okay.
See, they have to use a justification. There's a Controlled Substance Act that says, in fact, that these drugs are Schedule I, these drugs are Schedule II, these drugs are Schedule III. Marijuana is a Schedule I drug, which means that according to the federal government, there is no medically accepted use, and it has a very, very, very high potential for abuse. Of course, the fact that the federal government supplies 8 people, or actually down to 6 people now, I think 2 people have died. Oh, is it? They're actually supplying 8 people with rolled joints every month. That we, the taxpayers, pay at least $250,000 a year to grow marijuana and supply them to these patients. They are, in fact, saying, in our lawsuit, that it has no medically accepted use. They are saying that it is Schedule I drug, and therefore, but
Is not marinol a derivative of marijuana?
It's a synthetic.
It's a
Oh, it's a
synthetic
synthetic?
derivative. Right, it's a synthetic derivative.
THC.
Right. So at any rate, the thing is they are using the Commerce Clause to reach activity that is entirely intrastate. That is the way they justify having the Controlled Substance Act, reach our kind of activity.
Now, they are depriving you of a jury trial, or depriving the cannabis clubs of a jury trial. Do you believe they will be effective in this approach? Is there a precedent for this?
Well, ultimately, the result will be that, in fact, every club I have talked to, and I have talked to almost all of the directors of the clubs involved, every one of the clubs will ignore any injunction if it is in fact issued by the federal government, at which point
tested in a legal action.
At which point they will be in contempt of the order, and at that time there will be the availability to a jury trial.
I see. Let's take a step back, because you mentioned no medical approved use of marijuana according to the federal statutes at this time, and we have a number of people here today who have been very involved in the medical use of marijuana. And why don't I start just with an open question to three people here. Silver, Andrea, Valerie, you've all been involved in the medical use of marijuana. Is there a body of literature that documents that there is beneficial use, or have you seen beneficial use? And why don't we get answers from all three of you at some point?
Okay.
Well,
Would you like to
well,
go first, Val?
First of all, I wanted to say that I'm with the Women's Alliance for Medical Marijuana with WHAM. I'm the founder of WHAM, and we're a nonprofit 501c3 in the state of California, first in the nation.
The nation.
And a body of literature, well, yes, there have been many studies that have been conducted since and throughout the 70s and even through the 80s. And presently there is a research study being awarded to Dr. Abrams in San Francisco, who has tried numerous times to have this study approved through the FDA and DEA, and has just recently, with extreme pressure, managed to get not only funding but material and primarily the approval of the FDA and DEA. So consequently, there's a great deal of information, both anecdotal and otherwise, that would substantiate the use of marijuana medically and would show its value in not only extreme cases, but in many cases such as asthma and migraines, which is not to say that suffering is not extreme to the person who happens to be suffering, but that there are different weights. The federal court in April of '96, April 30th, found in a lawsuit against a class action lawsuit brought against Janet Reno, Donna Shalala, Thomas Constantine, and Barry McCaffrey, had found in favor of the possibility of physicians recommending marijuana. Now, 215 doesn't say prescribing.
A lawsuit against the federal government essentially found in favor?
Found in favor of patients in order to be able, what's that? Okay. To be able
You need to
to,
make a microphone adjustment for her?
let's have a little bit. To be able to,
Is that okay? You can
how's
do
this?
that. Is
Is
that better?
So that, is that better? So that patients can not only have a conversation with their physicians, which is something that the federal government had tried to, if you remember last year, when the federal government came out stating that a physician could not only not recommend marijuana, but could not even have a conversation with a patient regarding the use of marijuana. This was a class action lawsuit brought against these 4 officers
And it was
of the
victorious?
federal government. So far, so good.
At what level?
On the 9th District Court, federal court in San Francisco.
So
So
the
it is
federal
a federal, it is a federal judge
The federal-
with a federal ruling.
So the federal government would have to appeal that to the Supreme Court if they wanted to
It's-
challenge that?
Yes, but it's still in process. There's still findings being
Isn't there
covered.
true that some doctors in Santa Cruz and wanting there was an injunction against one?
It was Dr. Leff who was part of this group of doctors who actually brought the lawsuit. It's called Conan versus McCaffrey. And what happened is it's actually a U.S. District Court Judge, Fern Smith, who issued the injunction against the federal government interfering in the First Amendment right of a doctor to discuss privately with their patient medical marijuana. And in fact established a way that a doctor could in fact recommend marijuana without risking their license being pulled. This was another DEA ploy to try and gut the law, by getting to the doctors, and especially getting to the doctors where what might hurt, that was threatening to take their license to prescribe medicine away from them, which of course sent a bone-chilling fear throughout the medical community. We're still dealing with that at this point. Doctors are still very, very reluctant to deal with this. But I would
still have the right to do so.
Yeah,
In this hearing, what
because of
came
it.
about is that 5 illnesses, HIV, AIDS, cancer, glaucoma, epilepsy, and other spasticity-related illness, which in fact includes any spasticity-related illness, multiple sclerosis, paraplegia, quadriplegia, and asthma is a spastic condition of the esophagus. So it does broaden it, and there are other illnesses that are also being brought forth for hearing, and this should come about sometime for the end of April. I'm one of the members of this lawsuit, and I'm a plaintiff in it. And it's, as I say, a class action, so it has far-reaching effects. You don't pick one of the most elite groups in America, like physicians, and try to go after them. It just doesn't make sense. So the tactic now is, of course, go after the clubs, close down access. The concept is to deny access of medical marijuana to individuals. To say that I have cancer today, find out I'm going to start chemotherapy in 3 weeks, and now I need to grow a crop, it's impossible. They understand that. So you take away the source.
I want to step back a little bit and pick up this thread in a moment, but I want to talk a little bit about what people have personally seen as the medical effect of marijuana. This is a different question
Lots
from
of
what
people,
studies...
56% of the people in California already have seen that. They understand it.
But
And
let's tell our viewing audience, what do you see when patients with particular illnesses, your anecdotal experiences, when patients take marijuana, and what do they take it for, and what's the effect?
Yeah, Joe, my experience my first experience with medical marijuana was back in the mid-'80s. And I was living in San Francisco, and I knew a large number of people in the gay community. And all of a sudden, people started coming down with, which we found out later, with AIDS. And many of those people had very bad prognosis, and they were in hospitals, and they were close to dying. And my partner and I would go make some brownies or cookies, take it over to people, and doctors were amazed at how this medical marijuana worked. And many people who were close to dying with pneumocystis came back and lived on for another 6 months or a year or even longer. So that was my first exposure to medical marijuana. I had been using marijuana prior to that since the mid-'60s, just about when a lot of people started using marijuana for medicinal purposes, stress, some psychological problems that I was dealing with. But this was really clear that it was actually saving people's lives. And so I continued to administer the medicine to my friends who were very sick, and they got better. Most recently, my mother, who is 83 years old, and her birthday is tomorrow, by the way, April 1st. And she's here in Santa Cruz. I brought her out here a couple years ago, and she was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. And with Alzheimer's, she became she still becomes very agitated very easily. And marijuana, there's nothing like marijuana to calm down the symptoms of agitation. And she becomes so calm and tranquil, she actually becomes a little giddy. And what's the harm with that, to feel good?
Charlie?
You remind me of a lady. What was the lady's name that was serving brownies and administering?
Mary.
And just so wonderful. And they tried to arrest her for this.
That was
and
in San
San Francisco.
Yeah. We have a patient at the club that I think is a really very profound example and anecdotal. She is a very young woman with multiple sclerosis. She is confined to a wheelchair with her condition, and in fact she gets spasms so bad. She has a small child that she can't even hold her child. She just is jerking and shaking, and she'll come to the club, and we will actually have to hold something to her mouth because she can't hold on to anything. And she will take one hit of marijuana, and it just fades away. It is absolutely the most profound thing, and if I
What is her
hadn't
diagnosis?
witnessed this, she has multiple sclerosis. If I hadn't witnessed this myself, and this, she's just one example of many, many, many patients that I have seen who are just profoundly improved after a small ingestion, very small ingestion of marijuana. And by the way, different types of marijuana help different types of conditions, and they've killed studies for so long into the medicinal qualities of marijuana that we're just beginning to find out now exactly what strains help what type of disease. Some very low grades of marijuana actually are more helpful than high grades of marijuana for certain conditions.
In other words, marijuana with a lower concentration of the active ingredient.
That's
Well, there are
correct.
many active ingredients.
Right, of the
Over 40
THC
different
ingredient. Right.
Cannabidiols, but
They're
when-
what?
there are over 40 different cannabidiol, which are different. There are different
40 different active
properties.
ingredients?
Different properties.
So
Yeah,
when
so-
people just think tetrahydrocannabinol,
It's a plant.
that's only one
Right.
part of the action.
Well, all plants are like that. Any plant medicine is going to have different properties that interact with one another to make it benefit or to be of benefit. A single compound drug, which is what the FDA sells, has different properties, a single compound. So it can only work in that manner. But to back up, I'm an epileptic and was in a car accident 25 years ago. 24 years ago began using marijuana because the drugs that I was using didn't work. 6 years ago was arrested and was the first patient in the state of California to challenge the law on medical necessity, and won and was rearrested, and began this organization, WHAM, which is a group of primarily terminal patients, almost all patients with either cancer or HIV/AIDS. And the work that we do is both anecdotal, and we have a support group, and we grow. It's a collective organization. We grow marijuana, and we give it away. It works. We work for free because that's how we keep the prices out of it, and that's how we establish our nonprofit. And of course, it's not something that everybody can do. It's not something that every organization can do. And buyers clubs are an important part of this process. We run the sort of welfare or social services aspect in a collective manner. But we've been breeding marijuana for 24 years. And what we found is in the collection of the anecdotal evidence that I've been gathering for 5 years, so yes, just a little bit under 5 years, have been gathering this information. And we found that with the 32 different strains that we've developed, which is something that Kate referred to, that we have found that different strains are effective on different illnesses. Now, this is a high variable, and it would be only with some very intricate studies, research studies, that could prove the kinds of qualities. And believe me, the federal government will do this. They will want to know which little pill to make. And I have no opposition to little pills. People use them all the time. And I think that if they're a benefit and somebody doesn't want to smoke or ingest it or finds another means of using a medicine that's a benefit, it's like anything else. If it helps, use it. The doctor's never going to never tell you to stop. But the whole plant medicine should not be scorned, nor should it be disregarded. It is a plant after all, and it's very difficult to tell the plant kingdom that it shouldn't exist.
Right. I want to come back and ask why you believe that the federal government is so intent on eliminating the use of this for medical reasons, but I also would like to talk Silva and ask you've had a personal experience using medical marijuana. Would you like to share with us?
In fact, I started using marijuana as part of my culture that I decided to reclaim when I was 15. And at that point, it was mostly what they call recreational, which I don't believe in. I call it recreate. But we'll go. I became a nurse and lost my whole straight nursing career as I know it. And thank Goddess to Valerie Corral and Mike for their 32 strains of wonderful, beautiful marijuana. I used to be in a wheelchair after this nursing accident. I suffered permanent ruptured disc disease syndrome with other difficulties. Just last night I passed out, but I'm here today because, and not being hokey, seriously, because of the half a muffin that I ate, and I was able to get out of the spasms. Antispasmodic. You were talking about that, and Kate and Valerie and Andrea. I find
You were having spasms and you ate a muffin that had
Yeah, I find
medical marijuana.
specifically the one that works for me is the indicas, or the indica sativa blend for the muscle spasms and the
Indica,
migraines.
sativa.
Blend, indicas. And this way I can sleep and I can get out. I go through severe pain. I put on a good face. I used to be in a wheelchair, but now I'm not, and now I'm recreating my new career as the mission calls me to WHAM, and I'm very grateful for that.
So it stopped spasms.
Stop spasms. Stop spasms. As I said, I was passing out last night. My partner is used to this, and I'm used to it. And after I didn't lose consciousness, I ate my muffin, which let me sleep all night, get out of the pain, the spasms, the migraine, on one side here, my whole right side's affected, sciatica, you name it. This whole list. So I've cut down on my Robaxins, which are antispasmodic, that type of medicine. That's one brand name of antispasmodic. That I find it tastes nasty. I never liked it. And I find that this works way better than the Robaxin. Now, I'm not putting down Western medicine because I had to go to nursing school at one time, but I also am a spirit person and reclaim that. So I mix the blend. I talk to patients like myself from WHAM and other patients and give support that way and share experiences.
So you are prescribed marijuana by a physician?
Recommended.
Recommended.
Recommended?
Right, recommended.
That's the way the Proposition 215 reads, that you are recommended by a physician to
One cannot.
because
Right.
it's not one of the scheduled.
Scheduled, yeah.
Now, you're also a nurse for the Women's Alliance for Medical Marijuana?
Well, I do a lot of the interaction, talking with people. We have a great support group there. As Valerie has says, we're a group collective, the first in the whole country with the 501c status, to have our garden and nurture it and help each other, support each other. It's a very loving, compassionate thing. And I found a place to put my heart because I love this plant and have all my life, for the spiritual, medicinal, the industrial attributes, all my life. And now I have a spot to express it. There's no fear in this.
What kind
Refuse
of
that fear.
what kind of patients do you see that you do work with?
Well, generally we go to the meetings and we sit and talk. It's a talking thing. Sometimes people call me, and when Valerie doesn't have time, I'm there archiving the video on TV with the news and the whole trip, and people will call me, and I'll have time. I'll make time to talk with them, and just let them ventilate and talk about their marijuana experiences and their diagnosis and their disease. And
What kind of diseases do they have usually?
well, most like, as we have said, WHAM is focused on mostly terminally ill patients, but there are people like me who are chronic, permanently injured. Lost my career as I knew it, but that's okay. Shut the door.
Terminally ill with cancer?
Cancer, AIDS, full-blown AIDS, breast cancers, all kinds of things.
What?
Silver, excuse me.
Yeah, go ahead, sorry.
May I, as I learned from Judy and Lynn Osborne, that medical marijuana has been practiced for 5,000 years.
Right.
And I was covering up my mic. No, it's been practiced for over 5,000 years for medical and religious practices. It was served during communion in the Christian church. Believe it or not, they don't necessarily talk about agnostic.
Before there was a pharmacopoeia.
Pharmacopoeia.
Right.
In fact, in the early 1900s in the government, it was all right to have marijuana as long as you registered as a marijuana user. I would like to address your question about the federal government and why they're doing what they're doing, because I think it's really interesting. This ties in with the very incredible body of experience there is available, in spite of the fact that it's been illegal in the medical world, to bolster our arguments here today. Back in 1970, when Nixon was trying to determine where to schedule marijuana, they called for medical studies, and they actually formed the Schaefer Commission, which studied marijuana for years, and then brought their evidence to an administrative law judge who determined that marijuana was one of the safest and most effective medicines that they had ever studied. Of course, the Nixon administration got a legal opinion that they could legally ignore, since this was just an administrative law judge. They could just ignore what the judge said and put it in Schedule 1. In other words, the federal government has a long and rich history of declaring the world to be flat. And as long as they continue to declare the world to be flat, it will be flat in their eyes. And the bad faith is just incredible. There was a petition to reschedule, which means that actually Normal brought a petition to reschedule the drug. It took them 24 years.
Normal stands for?
Normal stands for National Organization for the Reform Marijuana Laws. Right. Took them 24 years to go through this process to find that no, we shouldn't reschedule. I mean, there's just so much bad faith. It's really ridiculous.
Well,
In my,
no, after you.
in my opinion, I mean, it's touted that marijuana can replace, or at least be an adjunct medicine to some 40% of medicines contained in the pharmacopoeia. There's a good answer in itself. 40%. It's a financial
It's the money.
obligation that we have to pay our government for medicines that can grow in our own backyard.
I was about to say the same thing.
Before we get into that, we do have a phone call. And this is a call-in show, and I would like to let our viewers know that Voices from the Village looks for your phone calls, and you feel free to call in. Caller, you're on the air at Voices from the Village. Do we have our caller? Do we have our caller on? We're expecting a call from the District Attorney of San Francisco, but I don't know if we got him through yet. They lost the call? All right, well, hopefully he'll call back. Charlie, would you, did you have a question?
Well, I totally support what she's, I mean, it's the irony and the double standard, the government. I mean, don't they subscribe rolled cigarettes and
That's correct. I would like to
elaborate on that?
Yeah, I'd like to
Okay,
actually
while we're waiting for this call, go ahead.
piggyback on what Valerie had to say. Well, of course, the pharmaceutical companies are very upset. I mean, it is a medicine you can grow at home. And obviously, they couldn't control it, and that would be a very frightening thing for them. But I think you also have to look to the entire huge industry that's grown around the war on drugs to see that if they legalize marijuana, we're talking attorneys, we're talking the court system, the clerks, the judges,
prisons,
the police department, the DA, the prisons, all of these things. What are they going to do? I mean, when you look at the fact that violent crime has been dropping for 5 years in a row, and they just hired something like 17 new deputy sheriffs, what do you suppose these new deputy sheriffs are doing?
Right, but still, to make marijuana medically available and legalize that does not access any individual to marijuana for use other than medical. Right. It's not going to hurt the grants that any county or city receives for drug abuse or whatever, drug enforcement.
Clearly there's a great...
So, I mean, that's a really important
area.
point. And it's being looked at or viewed that this is the door that opens legalization to all marijuana, when in fact, it has not opened the door to prescribe opiates for pain to heroin. It has not made heroin legal.
It's not even considered.
It's not even
as a
considered.
connection.
For cocaine to be a Schedule II drug, to be prescribable, has not opened the door to the legalization of cocaine. So
So what is it that is so special in the minds of federal prosecutors and people who think about federal law? What is it that is so special about this particular plant?
Well, I would love to be inside the mind, or at least have a peephole into the mind of one of these. I wouldn't want to stay there very long, but one of these agents. But I still think that with the pharmaceutical companies, it has some great deal to do with a plant medicine that can be made free or very inexpensive. And also its ability to replace or be, as I said, adjunct to so many medicines that are already available.
Let's talk a little bit about what the fears are of people who are opposed to the legalization. And I think quite candidly, many of them are afraid that young people will take this as a message that it is okay to smoke marijuana.
Then what we do is we give the message that it's not. Advertising.
We use
We spend
all
a
of
great
that
deal
money that we're now spending in law enforcement to educate, and educate realistically, not in the manner that we have been educating. I mean, we grew up with the reefer madness. The education, believe it or not, is not much better today. Kids do not believe what the government's telling them because it's not real.
Does Women's Alliance for Medical Marijuana have an official position about the use of marijuana by teenagers?
Well, The only teenagers that we would ever consider serving are those who have a physician's recommendation.
Well, do you have...
And they're also their parents'
Do you have
signed agreement.
Do you have a recommendation or a position on recreational use by young people of marijuana?
Yeah, we have the same recommendation that we give to everyone. Any medicine that's used has to be treated with the utmost respect and to be honored as a medicine that serves a personal purpose, whether it's personal as a caregiver or personal for your own needs. But it is a medicine. That's all that we're looking at. That's the only issue that's at hand. For us to allow it to be clouded, for us to start talking about other issues is, as far as WHAM is concerned, not acceptable.
I understand.
And we don't deal with it.
I understand, but I'm addressing what I do believe, at least is this, close to the top of the stated fear of federal officials. They are, or at least they say this, and I do believe that many of them believe it. They are afraid that droves of young people will say, well, you know, this is a medicine, therefore it must be okay, even though young people don't say phenobarbital is a medicine, therefore I'm going to rush down to the corner and buy from my local dealer phenobarbital, or I'm going to go and get some other prescription drug because I see it being used. But if for some reason in the minds of officials it seems to have come to pass that they are very concerned that young people, this is at least what they state, will turn.
It's a real fear. It's an understanding.
But I think
Andrea.
that's kind of a cop-out. It's not really the truth, not the real reason, because you just open up any medicine cabinet, you see just a whole row of prescription medicine, some of them much stronger than marijuana. Prozac, how many millions of Americans take Prozac and other of these kind of drugs?
There is a confusing message, and the New Scientist just, in last month's New Scientist, had put out findings on teenage use on marijuana, and granted it is up in the United States. And as a matter of fact, it is proportionate with the increased use of marijuana throughout the world, internationally. Mm-hmm. So this is not something that's dependent or based upon this attention that medical marijuana has brought. And I think it's extremely important for us to keep in mind and to keep reiterating the fact that any medicine that's used is to be viewed in a very different way from recreational use. And I think, again, with information, education, advertising, the way we package the information.
And you know,
And I
what
think
you're
we have to
stating-
look
What you're stating, forgive me, is most obvious in other countries, the way they perceive marijuana, and the way they look as a class. I mean, as accepted from Amsterdam, from the Netherlands to Germany to they look. I think predominantly they look at it as a medicine. Do they not?
Well, there are some in Spain and England and Germany and Italy, of course the Netherlands. There is some, Switzerland as well, there's some view as it being medicine. England less so, but considering and reconsidering, because it was just until the mid-70s that it was still available as a tincture, as an extract. And Canada just had a landmark case where a patient won on constitutionality the right to use marijuana and to grow marijuana.
I want to just take a break here because we interviewed the sheriff of Santa Cruz County this morning, and I have a 5-minute and 20-second tape, unless that's, let's just see if this is the DA from San Francisco calling.
Filler, no problem.
If it is.
Yeah, I'd like to talk a little bit about addiction and how really ridiculous we are in terms of talking about one addiction as opposed to another. You know, we have the most addictive drug probably known to humankind is legal, that being alcohol, caffeine, nicotine, all of these things are, and marijuana they have found is one of the safest drugs imaginable. They have shot rats full of 1,000 times what would be a normal dosage of marijuana. And they're fine. They live through this. If they had given them any other kind of drug, they would be dead.
Yeah.
Any other kind of drug, they would be dead. That shows how medically safe this is.
But it's not to discount fears.
Oh, absolutely not. No.
It's his secretary.
So,
So yeah, and it just goes to show how absolutely safe this is, and how how we're not very consistent in our position as far as fear.
Okay. Let's take a call from, I believe we have the secretary from the district attorney of San Francisco on the line. Can you hear me? Are you there?
I'm here.
Hello, welcome to Voices from the Village.
They're far distant voices here.
Is this District Attorney Hallinan?
Yeah, this is Terrence Hallinan.
How are you experiencing the situation with the federal government's lawsuit against cannabis clubs?
Well, the judge has continued it for 20 days and asked for both sides to file some memoranda on some issues that came up during the course of the case. I felt that he was pretty open-minded, that he was trying to work his way through it, that he appreciated the medical aspect of marijuana, and he's trying to figure out how to reconcile that with federal law.
What do you think the basis of the case that the federal government has is?
The basis of their case is just saying it's against the law, it's against federal law to possess and cultivate and use marijuana, and the federal government does not have a medical marijuana defense. That's a state option, and therefore you're in violation of the law. The reality is, of course, the federal government doesn't enforce minor marijuana matters like this, and if they tried, it would be an impossibility. They'd be overwhelmed.
Do you think it's inappropriate for the federal government to have proceeded the way they are?
It's completely inappropriate, and I think the judge himself recognized that this was a highly unusual procedure, and for a law of the law enforcement that ordinarily doesn't even get involved in a marijuana case unless there's at least 500 pounds involved, for them to be involving themselves in grams of marijuana was really a political, not a legal situation.
Why do you think they're so motivated to move against this approval by the voters of California for the medical use of marijuana? What do you think is motivating the federal government?
I can only guess. I do know that the California district attorneys and Attorney General Lundgren in particular have put a lot of pressure on the Justice Department to do something about it. I assume they have made commitments to other drug law enforcement agencies that they will crack down on this medical marijuana. But in fact, the reality is it's going to be on 7 states next November. It is a recognition of a reality of marijuana that is going against the federal intervention.
We have another question for you.
Terrence, is it true that you're not going to arrest or you're supporting the clubs in San Francisco?
Well, we feel that the clubs, medical centers, whatever you want to call them, here in San Francisco are complying with the law as we interpret it under Proposition 215, and I'm convinced that they will convince Judge Garcia that they are in conformity with the law as well, that they are following the rules adopted by our Health Commission, that they are acting only on doctors' recommendations, that they're confirming those recommendations, that they don't have guest policies. Children are allowed only if they're with their parents and they have letters of their own, and they're basically providing a service for my office.
Anyone have a question for the district attorney?
Well, I would like to say, Terrence, this is Kate Wells. Whoops, we met at the court hearing, and I wanted to thank you publicly for taking your strong stance and coming out on our behalf and making the judge understand what a terrible thing it would be to close down the only safe access that these patients have to medication. So I want to take this opportunity to publicly thank you for having the guts to stand up for your beliefs. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Kate. And it's the will of the voters. I mean, the voters voted more strongly in favor of medical marijuana than they did to abolish affirmative action. And look at the way this government is falling over themselves to abolish affirmative action. It really makes you question what's going on here. And as you point out, the idea of turning 11,000 sick people out to the parks and alleyways of San Francisco to find marijuana on their own is a frightening concept.
You say that you believe the judge will see reason from the point of view that you're seeing it. What will happen then? What are the options depending on the various decisions that could come down?
I'm not 100% sure what the judge is going to do. I think he's looking for a way to do the humane and right thing here. He's a decent person, but he's constrained by federal law. I urged him just not to take it. Just take it under submission and do nothing, or else reject the federal jurisdiction over the case and leave it be settled in the state courts.
Terrence Hallinan, thank you very much for calling us today. We very much appreciate it here at Voices from the Village.
Okay, a pleasure.
Thank you. Your call has gone out to our viewers, and thank you again.
Good luck.
Thank you very much. Well, that was very illuminating. Let's go to a local law enforcement person who we interviewed today, Sheriff of Santa Cruz County, Mark Tracy, who we interviewed this morning in his office. And we have a 5-minute videotape of that. Are we ready with that tape? Why don't we show that tape, and we'll be back here at Voices from the Village in 5 minutes and 20 seconds.
You know, I have to tell you that the federal government, their representative phoned us before these papers were served, and we actually were able to call the Cannabis Buyers Club and the WHAM organization and let them know that this was happening. And so this was something that we openly talked with them about. It is an issue of a constitutional issue about federal rights versus state rights. And it's an interesting topic. I don't profess to be a legal scholar, and so I don't know what the outcome or the answer to this is going to be. Whether or not a state or a referendum can override a federal government who has had historically and legally the control about what drugs are listed or controlled drugs and what aren't. And that's something that's been going on for years. And so I do not know how this is all going to play out and how long it will take, but I think it is a valid constitutional issue. I think it just reaches certainly a higher interest because it's about this situation dealing with the medical marijuana. But this could come up probably in 10 or 20 or 30 other state versus federal rights situations.
Why is law enforcement standing aside even though the federal government claims it's illegal? Are you giving credence to the referendum, the voter initiative that has made it legal?
Well, I don't. The voter. First of all, the sheriffs in California are here to enforce California law. And if there's a referendum and there's California law around medical use of marijuana, and there's a system by which people are provided marijuana for medical use, then we're looking very carefully at how that is done in reference to 215. What we have here is the federal government coming in and saying it's a violation of federal law what's going on. And so I don't know that it's necessarily the responsibility of the sheriff, a local sheriff, to enforce a federal law or perceived violation of a federal law. Certainly that's what the question has become, is the competition or the question of which do we follow, the state or the federal law. Have we as a local sheriff office and police department and DA's office tried to work with in making 215 work? Yes, we have. And I think that's because it was a statewide referendum. Are there a lot of problems with it? Do we sit around the table and have issue with a lot of pieces of it and how to make it work? Yes, we do.
You expressed some concern with the fact that Proposition 215 was passed and that people may use it to somehow justify non-medical drug use. Could you comment on that?
Well, I think it's important that as we move through the process of looking at 215 and the medical marijuana issue, we make sure that the proper research is done. We make sure that the controls are there. We make sure that the wrong message isn't sent to young people around drug use in their lives. And I think sometimes people will take the issue of medical marijuana and try to use it as a furtherance the legalization cause. I know that many of the people I've been involved with in medical marijuana haven't done that, and they've stuck strictly to this one focused issue, and I prefer to do that too.
What will happen if the federal government wins its lawsuit against cannabis clubs? Will you feel compelled then to enforce the federal law, even if the initiative, in theory, well, in fact, actually passed, but now there's a federal ruling that it's illegal? What will the Sheriff's Department do then?
Well, I think the sheriff's offices or police departments throughout California would then look to the state and the Attorney General for the interpretation of how these laws would be enforced. We've generally done that in the past and followed Attorney General guidelines around 215. And so it'll take a very strong sort of examination of whatever court rulings there are, especially if there's civil rulings that occur. So at this point, without knowing how that all is going to play out, it's very difficult to give you a yes or no answer.
Any other comments you'd like to make on this issue, Sheriff Tracy?
I think the best thing in Santa Cruz County for the people to know is that law enforcement has worked with groups like WHAM to meet, talk about where the problems are with 215, or how patients can have access without fear. And so we've been doing that ongoing. And so I think that's the most important message, I think, to send, is that law enforcement is not an enemy in this situation locally. We're looking at how we can make this, best manage this situation as it progresses through the courts.
Sheriff Mark Tracy from Santa Cruz County. Any comments as we wind down to the end of our show here on medical marijuana and the federal government?
Well, I just wanted to back up a little bit. Kate was discussing the issues of abuse, and I think it's important to address the fact that I'm a commissioner on the Alcohol and Drug Abuse Commission, and I think it's extremely important to address these issues in our community of drug abuse, of parents' fears, and the knowledge that these are serious issues that we must address, and to keep our children's awareness that in living a healthy life and with a good education and a basis of love and a foundation that they can trust, that's what we're really dealing with. That if there are problems that they have with drug abuse or problems with marijuana or testing or playing, that they need to talk about this to people who understand that issue. And I think their parents or counselors or whoever else might be available. These are really important issues, not to be overlooked.
I would actually like to comment a bit about the lawsuit, the federal lawsuit, and I did, as I said, have the opportunity to represent the Santa Cruz Club at the hearing in San Francisco, the hearing that went on until 7 o'clock at night. We had a very compassionate judge who clearly was agonizing over how to reconcile the federal law and the state law. And I think I gave him a way to do it, and I'll tell you what that is. We have child pornography laws, and child pornography is in part at least taking pictures of nude children. And then you have the baby on the bearskin rug at Sears who's having their picture taken by the Sears photographer. That was not the sort of activity, the class of activity that Congress intended to outlaw with the child pornography law. My argument to the federal judge was, this is not the class of activities that Congress intended to outlaw by the Controlled Substance Act. Giving and sharing medicine with sick and dying people is not what was intended to be outlawed by the Controlled Substance Act. It was the illegal profiteering, trafficking of drugs, the pandering of drugs to children, that sort of thing. That is what Congress intended to outlaw. And I would also, one real quick last thing, and that is I would like to condemn the Attorney General of the state of California for his duplicitousness in cooperating with the DEA. The agents who came into the clubs and got marijuana under false pretenses had California driver's licenses, California medical board numbers, and I think think it's quite clear that Dan Lundgren, instead of defending the people of the state of California in what they voted for, has in fact attacked us and handed us to the DEA on a silver platter, cooperated in a criminal conspiracy to
You're saying it's
criminal conspiracy to come after these clubs to destroy the only safe access to medication these patients have.
What makes the Attorney General, who I believe is running for governor, what makes his action a criminal conspiracy as far as you're concerned?
Well, as far as I'm concerned, they falsified doctors' letters. They used a California medical board number that actually belongs to a practicing doctor who, a woman doctor who practices back east now. She had no idea they used her California medical board number. They set up a false doctor in an office. It was a DEA agent in an office in San Francisco, so that when we called to verify the actual recommendation, the doctor recommendation, we were reaching a DEA agent in San Francisco. It's an outrageous thing that they were doing. Sitting next to our sick and dying patients with their little video cameras and their, undercover James Bond stuff. Anyone who stands out there and watches the people roll in their wheelchairs into that club would know that this is not a party house. This is a place where sick and very sick and ill people come to get some refuge from their illness.
And I did invite a DEA representative, by the way, Kay Wells, and they referred me to San Francisco.
Well,
I think it shows.
We all know why they're not here.
I think it shows how far apart we are in this country in terms of what people are thinking. Obviously, agents of the federal government are very, very far away from what the majority of voters in California decided, and I think the implications are very far-reaching, not just for medical marijuana, but for a number of other things. Any last comments you'd like to make?
Well, the issue, excuse me.
I'd like to just say one statement. Let's continue and have courage. And we've seen through civil rights and all the other great things have been done, that we will not step back, we will go forward. Safe access, medical necessity is all valid.
Thank you, Silver Knight.
We've worked very hard to make medical marijuana a reality in California, and we want to see this all over the whole country, and I think that's what's going to happen.
I think that's what's afraid the DEA is
Thank
afraid
you.
of.
Kate Wells, thank you.
I'm very happy that you all were here and to educate the public. That's what we need, education.
That's what we do.
You know,
We always hear this, education, not prisons.
after facing, I think that a lot of people feel that after facing death and illness, that the federal government isn't such a formidable adversary.
Thank you very much, Valerie Corral, and everyone, Silver Knight, Kate Wells, Andrea Tischler,
Thank you.
co-host Charlie Phillips, for joining us here at Voices from the Village, and we look forward to seeing our viewers again. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay.